I've known Sister Joan from the very first year of my ordination 35 years ago. She has recently retired and celebrated just this year 60 years of religious life as a Dominican sister from Spark Hill, New York. For the last 29 years, she worked at the Flathead Reservation in Montana with the Native Americans there. The native name they gave her during that time was Stipa Machu. It means falling waters. For all that time, I've just called her Earth Mother. She's full of wisdom from those years, and one of the great gifts she gave me was to introduce me along the way to a young woman named Kateri Tekawitha, who captured my imagination, even to the point of driving 3 hours alone to the place she lived and loved God in Canada just a few years back. Right now, this very hour is concluding in Rome the canonization of that young woman. The Church canonizes her today, saint. The very first Native American canonized a saint in history. I asked Joan if she would to join us today to share a word of wisdom about this young woman, just 24 when she died, who had such an impact on her life and through her on me, and as a matter of fact now, on the whole church. Stipa Machu, falling waters.
Whoever would be great among you, she must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you, he must be there for all. And as Father Gary told you, my friends, this very day, the realization of these words of Jesus are being fulfilled for hundreds of thousands of persons, many of whom are indigenous peoples from all around the world. Today in Rome, this young American Indian woman is being officially canonized a saint, a holy woman for all of us to come to know and to learn from her life.
Her name was Tekawitha, and she received the name Kateri, or Catherine, when she was baptized. As a very young maiden, she walked in the forests and glens of America a whole century before there even was a United States. Today she is known and revealed throughout the world, and most especially by the native peoples here in North America. She was a true child of the continental wilderness that would be forged over the years into a mighty nation. She was also a child of the Creator of this land. And she was chosen by God to experience a communion with God in prayer and contemplation, which bore fruit in her loving and joyful service to all around her. She was truly a seed which would give birth to Christ's life among her native peoples.
Kateri gives witness to God's presence in our humanity in a most remarkable and historic manner. Legend tells us she was born in the very place where St. Isaac Jogues and his Jesuit companions were martyred just 10 years before. Her mother, Kahenta, was a member of the Christian Catholic Canadian tribe, the Algonquin, but she had been abducted to become the wife of the leader of a warlike Mohawk tribe here in America. Mohawk leaders didn't trust the Christian missionaries, and therefore they rejected Christ's message. at least Christianity as they heard it. So Kateri's mother was unable to practice her Christian faith while she lived among them. When Kateri was born, however, it is said that her mother, looking into the eyes of her beautiful baby girl, called her the Lily of the Mohawks, which was a preview of the light that would shine for centuries brightly through this woman, and also the sweet perfume of her extraordinary holiness that would lovingly permeate this land, later to be called America. Other than this, though, there was nothing in this child that would indicate she ever would be grown into a woman, much less a saint, like many of us. Her mother, father, and small brother died in the smallpox epidemic. Tekawitha herself was left with scars which disfigured her whole face and body and severely damaged her eyesight. She was left an orphan with diminished sight, whose body had been disfigured by the smallpox. So some might say she could be called the least among us. Having suffered and been emptied by so many afflictions in her short life, Kateri hungered for love and truth and goodness. And hearing how Jesus himself had suffered to make known God's love to us, this touched her deeply, and gradually over the years, her only desire became to return this love, give it back, which what we're doing here this morning. As we heard in the letter to the Hebrews today, she too learned how Jesus took our pain and our weakness and became one with us. So he understands, he knows. On Easter Sunday in 1676, Kateri was able to speak out loud the love that was transforming her whole being. She was baptized, and she was soaked, literally soaked, with the life of her lover. She seemed different now, though, to her people, and she was expected to marry, as all women in her tribe did. She chose not to do so. Many began to look at her as different, as someone who didn't belong anymore. They belittled her and made fun of her, and not knowing and understanding. Even in the face of all this, however, she responded with loving service, continuing to find goodness, beauty in each of those around her, and it seemed like nothing could take away her joy. However, as this mistreatment continued, leaders from her mother's tribe urged her to go back with them to Canada, where she would be safe and would be able to grow in the life she had chosen. It was here also that Kateri vowed to live as one completely dedicated to Christ. And this final solemn commitment set a seal on her life. Her people called her their treasure because she came to truly embody Christ for them. And it was through her now. It was through her person and her way of treating them that they came to know Jesus and experience his love for them. Her health failing gradually through the years, the people knew that she would not be with them much longer, and they found ways to honor her fleeting presence. She died on Wednesday of Holy Week, and her last words were simply, Jesus, I love you. And as she drew her last breath, her body took on this lustrous radiance as though she was turned inside out. And all her scars are said to have disappeared from her face as those who mourned her watched in astonishment. I had some water. Don't get old because you get dry. They call me falling water for nothing. I mean, they don't call me As the news spread through what we call the Indian grapevine, natives from all over began special devotions to Kateri. It is said that she appeared to her friends at the mission soon after her death. Within months, favors were reported as a result of her intercession. And 333 years later, the story of her life lives on. Imagine that. So many years, and she's still alive for our church. And now will be even more present. And today, for us, how does Kateri serve us? The one we now call a saint. One who has lived into the fullness of her being. Most of us have been told since we were small that we should love God with all our hearts and with all our minds, which is true. But I don't know about you. I'm not sure that I really knew how to love God back. I always felt I had to try harder because of my weakness and the powerlessness I experienced in staying with my good resolutions. That whole idea of earning God's love by doing good deeds or giving things up that I liked, all of this became a stumbling block to the freedom of acting out of love as a response to seeing and experience God as my lover, who would never go away. And Kateri was so ready for this love, for that overwhelming experience of the full loving embrace of the divine. The embrace in which her littleness became greatness. In June of 1980, exactly 300 years after her death, she was beatified by the church, a blessed. In that same year in August, I was missioned to Montana to work among the Salish Kootenai peoples. During my many years there, I witnessed Kateri's loving influence among the people. She became again this life-giving seed that began to blossom and bear fruit. Her words, "I am no longer my own. I have given myself back entirely to Jesus Christ," became for the Christian native men and women throughout this country a reason to come to know this Jesus and the wonderful stories of God's inclusive love for his peoples, her peoples. And we prayed often. Many of the men and women on the reservation got together every month, and we had a little statue. But we got this beautiful picture, and we began to use that. But we didn't almost need that. It was as though she was present in many of those people who loved her. And most of those women are in heaven right now, so I think they were pushing Benedict to get her canonized. We've been praying for 100 years. We can call her the least among us because she was not filled with herself. And so there was space for God's Spirit to take form within her being. In this, her uniqueness was not diminished, but rather enhanced, so she could truly become the vessel she was called to be. And becoming this whole person, she could clearly mirror the divine image in whom she was made. In truly being herself, there was a magnetism which drew others to her, to catch the fire, the divine passion, which moved her to care so deeply for other peoples. And my brothers and sisters, there is that same call in each of us disciples, isn't there? That's why we're here. There is that hunger in each of us. Like Kateri, we each have a legacy to fulfill. Each of us, from the littlest to the oldest, which I may be that. And as we see in her life, it's a promise which takes form in us, but we need to desire that. As we heard in the gospel today, there is the power within us. It's all there to fulfill this promise. Can we let this young Native American woman, same age as many of us here today, show us how this can be done unto us? How God's greatness can be magnified through our littleness. And folks, it ain't easy. I don't know about you, but I don't like my weaknesses. I don't like my inabilities to have some power over my life. But guess what? I believe God does. God loves our weakness. Because through that powerlessness that we feel sometimes, there's a wholeness, a hole in our soul to receive that power. And I and you and each of us here can become whole. And that's what we're called to be. That's a saint. Namlanj Pasiye.